Okay, I have the lovely role of giving the last talk where really I'm not talking about anything specific that I've done, which is perhaps sad and a first for me, but talking about sort of a vision of looking at collaboration going forward. And so I wish I could have written my talk at the end of this day, but I sort of wanted to share some of like the amazing things that I wrote down in my notes as I was thinking about this day in terms of how we're, I thought about Sue Johnson Wilder's thing about, mass anxiety and all of this. And I thought, we are all the people in the room who are trying to really deeply think about this for students, that we are trying to think about measuring exactly what she said, what it is we want to teach them. So forward looking into what does the student know? How do we think about what's next? That this diagnostic is this first step in sort of this learning process. And so really understanding what does a student know versus what can they not do? Because what can they not do is actually pretty easy. You just put some really hard questions on there. But what they do know is sort of harder to, suss out and then think about what are they ready to learn? What do we want to think about? And then all importantly with that, recognizing that students are very bad judges often of their own knowledge of what they may or may not know. And so how do we help them with that process? And then a lot about what Tatiana brought to us in terms of we have the data from the diagnostic. So how do we use that for good? Like what is then the purpose of that data in terms of does it inform our teaching, which it should, perhaps. Does it inform what happens in our support centers or our learning labs? They affect students, what they're doing, or in terms of PAL, when you're having those breakout groups for students. Does it infer curricular changes, which it certainly has on our campus? We realized after having tens of thousands of students go through our diagnostic that we were teaching in some of our courses things that they already knew and really weren't spending time teaching things that we wanted them to learn, but we sort of assumed that they did know. And so we had this opportunity to really think about, now that we have a better understanding of their knowledge state entering our courses, what's the best use of that time? And so how do we think about that? And so anyway, you can go to the next slide. I sort of like, I think about this. Oh, no, one back, sorry. The challenges that we face are basically the same. And I think I am reassured, but also very saddened by the fact that we have people from 5 different countries, 4 different continents. We want more partners, and we are all having the same conversation, that mathematical preparedness is lacking. Students are transitioning to higher education. And there was a great comment today. I loved this. What was it? Oh, I'm sorry, that it's not a routine continuation of the prior learning. I was like, that is such a good comment. I have to think of that they've had this secondary experience and we've sort of delivered them to one side of this rapidly flowing river and say, swim across, and then we'll assist you. So we are sort of the people in the river. They're sort of, using our diagnostics and our supports to put out the lifeboat to help them come to campus and be successful. But I think that students themselves, which was why it was interesting to hear that sometimes those high achievers go down and those low achievers, go up, because we're sometimes targeting more supports to the students who came in sort of left behind. So how do we help this process? So persistent issues with readiness. And what does that mean? It's a problem for us as an institution if students don't continue to progress, or we've done a lot of money spending to recruit them to our institution and then they leave. And so it costs the institution a lot of money, but also the student, if they've invested coming to higher education and they have to drop out of their major or drop out of university or go back to something. So the costs are very high on both sides for when a student comes to higher education and is not successful. And it tends to be the mathematical or more broadly the quantitative. So it's not just an issue for math departments in general on campus, but for every single unit on campus that has some sort of quantitative backing to it. And so our work is really important. I mean, I would like to think we're the most important unit on campus because it's my discipline and I love it. But the reality is we certainly have our hand in everyone else's pot. And so when we make things better for students, it's like that slow lava effect that has sort of a benefit to all the other units on campus. And so this doesn't need to be on. I can just look at you. So why?
Oh, sorry, I think that's
just... okay. I'm like, how did my closing this affect the computer? Like, so the next one, yeah. So why diagnostic tools? I mean, I think we've talked about this again. So I get the great summary. We want something to be personalized. And so we want to be able to really identify what is a student's knowledge state. Do we really understand what knowledge they have? And if they're lacking things, I always think of spackle. Sorry for those, like, how do you fill in individual cracks for students? Because not everybody's lacking the same thing. So it's not only that personalized understanding of what they know, but then how do you sort of prime that or connect that to personalized supports to help that student, or more broader supports to help commonalities within the context of a course. And then again, coming back to that data, we all have massive amounts of data every time we're diagnosing students. And if we have more institutional data that we can connect to that, we are sitting on this massive amount of information, and that we can now start to understand, are you seeing here, Tatiana, at your institution, the same things that we're seeing at our institutions? Or
James
over here, no, the person who was
Moses
was Moses seeing things that he saw. We are seeing that students who come to this institution are students who have, a difference in socioeconomic standing or gender or other things, that we're having changes there. So the commonalities that we have also help us make informed decisions on how can we share resources, share solutions, and go forward in terms of what we can do in the future. And so our vision is sort of dual purpose. How can we think about, diagnostic? And we all are saying it's not so much the higher end topics that really are causing students to fail. It's often the underlying sort of core topics that are sort of more the algebraic manipulation, the understanding of those things at the bottom of these branches that then go out into the trees. And so if we are seeing commonalities, which we are in terms of what's happening, it doesn't mean we necessarily need to have the same diagnostic tool. But if we have shared concepts on these different diagnostic tools, does this allow us then to look at shared sort of outcomes? Can we take a subset of these sort of concepts and think about what does analysis look like that in the future in terms of that? And also, how do we build out support if we're seeing these commonalities in terms of where students fail? Can we learn from each other, or look to not like a uniform single solution, because it's really never a one size fits all, at least certainly not in my life. And so, but what do we think about common solutions that have institutional fit that make sense on our campus? And this is my lovely quad at my campus, which I like to think about in terms of being there in Illinois, although the weather doesn't look like that at all, but it's still, it's cold and windy and really unpleasant. So it's nice to be here. So can we have international benchmarking tools? Because the calculus curriculum and higher up is pretty standard across the globe. And so if we're thinking about benchmarking tools, can we start to look at, okay, we're seeing students who all scored poorly on this type of level of concept on our independent diagnostics, and then that is also translating into them not being successful, or they are successful in their calculus course or higher up the curriculum. So can we think about this sort of area in terms of what only we're seeing in our diagnostic, how we can support them, how we can improve that, and then how that translate into course outcomes, and then course progression, because of course we want all of our students to stay in their STEM majors and take more math classes while they're on our campuses. So there's that. And so, as I said, we have these shared challenges across nations: inconsistent preparation, weak foundations. We could always look down to the, the elementary, the primary and secondary preparation, but the reality is, at the end of the day, we admitted the students. It now becomes our responsibility to help solve this. We can't point blame. And also diverse backgrounds, and that's becoming more of an issue, certainly as countries are changing, more populations are moving around. And so, and certainly in the US, all of these things are heavily dependent on wealth. And so the quality of any school, district, or system in the US is heavily dependent on the wealth of the community. And so if you happen to end up in, a zip code where there's not a lot of money, your access to quality and quantity of education is really lacking. And that seems to also be common around the world. And so proof of concept of pilots, what can we hope to do as a group? This is our second year coming together. We already have twice as many people this year. And so we're hoping for more people. So what is the goal? What is our vision for moving forward as a group and recruiting other people? And so scope and scale, bringing in more institutions in each country, maybe bringing a fifth continent to really understand what they're doing in other countries, the similarities, differences, and how can we learn from each other? Can we have some shared concepts? Can we look at our different diagnostics on our campuses and sort of map out where we have very common concepts and then do some research around that if that would be of interest? Focus areas, these are the ones that I was thinking about, algebraic manipulation. Mark alluded to this in his talk this morning, but we at Illinois and also they did at Johns Hopkins, that you could almost one-to-one assign grades in multivariable calculus on a 10-point arithmetic test they took at the beginning of the semester. And so how students scored on that was very, very highly correlated with how they were going to do in their Calc 3. And so it really sort of reminds us that it's not their handling of sort of the newly learned, it's what fell apart before they even showed up at our doorstep. So thinking about these focus areas and mathematical reasoning. And I often say, and I'm sadly true, I don't think believer, but to sort of understander, that solving is the last thing that my students will ever do. They seek first. And so they are seekers, they are not solvers. And so how do we also think about changing that sort of narrative or dynamic that they attempt to actually solve something before seeking an answer? And certainly with generative AI, that's just going to get harder. But solving is really last. And I'm sure that other people have seen that as well, unless they're right in front of you and they're starting to shake because you've told them they can't touch any technology. So how do we get students to that? Thinking about things in terms of pre-assessment data and course success rates. Can we start to take the data that we have and match these things together and start getting better understanding as we improve our diagnostics? Are we seeing better improvement in course success rates, which then should lead to better progression of our students, and what are the commonalities there? And data collection, and that will be a tricky one, but we all have a lot of data, and so how can we get anonymous aggregate data and sort of for better analysis from cross institution to institution? And so going forward, and it's hot in the front of the room here. And so this is a repeat of the previous one. So yes, the mathematical competencies again, and then the long-term vision. So thinking about international benchmark. So hoping that other folks here, other institutions, go out and recruit some people. Would like to think about standards for assessing mathematical readiness. And again, thinking about what students know and not what they don't know. So we can think about what it is that we're ready to teach them, what they're ready to learn. Supporting student transitions. I think that support piece, there was that other great quote, but I've not closed my computer, is that access without support is meaningless or something. It's not access. So, telling them, well, this is what you know, it really is not that helpful. We really need to tell them this is what you know and here's what we can do next. Like this is the right math class for you, or these are the supports, and how do we build in those topics for you? So thinking about supporting student transitions, which I know everyone here is pretty heavily invested in. Influence curriculum design, at least on my campus, like the curriculum hasn't really changed in a really long time. Like we've made some changes, but do we need to be thinking more about using all the data that we have to really think about, are our courses structured the way that they are? Do we have, gaps and overlaps that maybe we need to rethink? Or at least in the US, curricular design was really pushed more by the publishing companies, the people who publish the textbooks. They were really dictating more what it is that we teach in our class in what order than the person in the front of the room. And you're sort of mandated to use this textbook because there was some agreement. And that's not really how we should be teaching our classes or thinking about curriculum. So, how can we make our decisions and also then have the data to back it up, saying, we want to think about these things. International funding. So Tatiana just sent Anita and I a call for a grant. And so that would certainly be some funding to look at some of these projects, cross-institutional, cross-country, thinking about funding opportunities to further some of this research collectively, and then share again next year when hopefully Anita will host us again in lovely Cape Town.
Most welcome.
Okay, thank you. And so sort of next slide, I think I'm doing okay on time. These are sort of challenges and considerations. Data privacy is a huge issue, and we're from different countries, and so every nation, continent, country has its own sort of things around data privacy. So how do we think about getting access to data, being able to share that data in a meaningful way? Because if it's so accurate and anonymous, then sometimes we lose some sort of meaning in that. So thinking about data privacy issues, platform scalability. Using, Don and Emma are using Numbus and then looking at scalability of what that looks like. We've been using Alex for a long time, looking at scalability of what that looks like, and thinking about when we first used Alex on our campus, we knew it worked for us, but sort of understanding, was it unique to Illinois' population or did it work for other institutions? So understanding, is it fitted so closely to your institution, or what are sort of the scalability and sort of transition. That's not the right word. Anyway, I'll come back to what word is I once said. The different diagnostics, is it portable? Oh, thank goodness. Is it portable to another institution or another context? Funding streams. Okay, so money would be great. So that we can do more research and have more collaboration and have time to be doing that research. And cross-national coordination. So how do we continue? I think the four of us, I feel very thankful that we have been able to maintain this sort of cross-national collaboration and continue and meeting up at other conferences. But how do we, further the conversation? I mean, the four of us is great, but how do we then continue that into bringing other partners to the table to think about what we hope to do? All right. And lastly,
there we go.
Next steps, really sort of under defining the scope, like what is it in the next year that we'd like to do from sort of this meeting, from this collaboration, moving forward, what's maybe a short-term goal or a longer-term goal in terms of our interaction and collaboration, identifying partners, other institutions, other countries, maybe another continent that would like to be involved, engage providers, are there tech companies or other technologies that might be interested in being part of this and exploring what can and cannot be done in terms of diagnostic tools, or the supports that come after those diagnostics. How do we link those things together? Applying for funding, yes, money is coming back. That's always a big thing. So how can we get some funding to be doing this research, or to have graduate students that can support that research, or pay for us all to come together to discuss our research and what's good to, and sort of launch a pilot. What's the time frame look like for in terms of pilot of whatever the scope might be of this project together? It is ambitious, but I'm already amazed at how much work we've already done, certainly since we've been communicating with each other and thinking about these things. And so it's ambitious, but I feel confident in moving forward. And then lastly, I think I guys have our contact information for this awesome group of folks from the 4 continents that we have been organized the last 2 years to get together. And so myself, Anita, Anthony, and Don, we're AAA, and we've read. We're gonna have to have Don change his name. No. To go forward, to think about what can happen next and what we should be planning for next year. So again, I had the joyful. It's been an amazing day, and I'm going to go back through all of the things that I wrote down. So thank you to all the presenters for all the shared knowledge and joy that they brought me today.